Come, let us reason together. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the book of Isaiah, and I have been running a series on Isaiah. So this is just sort of a continuation of that series. And I'm finding the prophet Isaiah to be very fascinating. The more I dig into the book and the more I do the research on the background of Isaiah and what people in ancient times thought about Isaiah and how Isaiah considered himself, I just find it fascinating. And one of the greatest passages in Isaiah, of course, aside from the greatest passage in Isaiah, which is Isaiah 52:13 all the way through Isaiah 53:12. Those are, of course, the greatest passages in Isaiah. We're going to talk a little bit about that today, but also we're going to talk about Isaiah's vision and commission. And you can see that in Isaiah 6. And the neat thing about Isaiah 6 is it gives us an insight on what exactly we can know about our lives. And so that's what's super fascinating. And so if you take a look, and I want to say before I even go here, thank you so much for a super sticker, Doki Doki FFT fan club. Again, I can't wait till I'm on Standing for Truth channel. That's going to be coming up on December 6th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So please tune in for that. We're going to talk about Isaiah. And also thank you to Jason Tolkien. Good to see you. So great to see everybody. I hope you guys are having a great day. Let me just adjust my microphone here a little bit. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this Isaiah 6. I've also got some stuff I'm going to bring up from the Sanhedrin. I'm going to talk about a Targum Isaiah, and some other very interesting information. So I hope that you guys are ready to go. And I want to say hi also to Slam. So great to see you, Susan. So this is good stuff. So let's go. So here's Isaiah's vision. Now just think about this. And now let's first understand who exactly Isaiah is. Isaiah was a prophet who lived around the year 740. He lived in the 8th century BC. And initially, all of the chapters, I should say, of Isaiah were attributed uniquely to only Isaiah. And a lot of people today are trying to make waves with this idea that Isaiah actually has many divisions. Some say 3, some say more. And a lot of assertions are come about because the prophecies that are in Isaiah are so specific, so incredibly specific, that people feel as if he could not have possibly known as a man some of the prophecies that he foretold. And of course, we believe that God gave Isaiah these prophecies. Isaiah was very special. He set him aside. Isaiah was married to a woman. He called her the prophetess. They had a couple of kids, and the kids had very unique names that related to ransom and other things that had to do with the book of Isaiah. But looking at Isaiah's vision, so in the year that King Uzziah died, and this is in 740 BC, this is a reference to Isaiah, saw the Lord sitting upon his throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2, he covered his face, and with 2, he covered his feet, and with 2, he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. Now, just think about this particular verse. I also want to say hi to philosophical logic, which is also my friend, and yes, a difficult topic. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more. So look at this verse, and one of the reasons why I say that Isaiah 6 explains so much in our lives is because we realize that if we were to ever encounter the Lord, even no matter how great we are, how great we think we are, how few sins we commit, whatever it is, even if we're saintly, standing at the foot of the Lord would help us realize really our true level with respect to him. And of course, our true level is just, I am lost, woe is me, I'm unclean compared to him. The beauty and the serenity and the light that shine from the Lord would be exhilarating, and it would also be something that would be breathtaking and awe-striking, and it would just probably put us really to our feet. And so just seeing Isaiah's reaction, woe is me, I am lost. And of course, that's the kind of reaction that St. Peter had. You can see what Peter said, sort of the same thing. Jesus created a miracle right around Peter, and Peter suddenly realized, he says, this is how the miracle occurred. He said, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word, I will let down the nets. Of course, Peter was a fisherman, so they let the nets down into the Sea of Galilee. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners on the other boat to come and help them, but they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. That's from Luke 6, 1-5. Now, again, this is the comparison. You can actually map the book of Isaiah to the Bible. The first 39 books of Isaiah talk about the history and the idea of woe is Israel, and woe are a whole bunch of other countries. Woe is Babylon, woe is Medo-Persia, all of these other countries also going through a series of woes. Of course, woe is Assyria. And so you can see those kind of things in Isaiah. And then you see in the second half of Isaiah, if you split it up in just half, books 40 to 66, you will notice that we can go to the New Testament, which also, just like 40 to 66, contains 27 books. And those, of course, talk about revelation and the light and the atoning sacrifice from Jesus. And you can see that in Isaiah 53 and compare that right to Jesus' crucifixion. And then, of course, the very last couple of chapters of Isaiah talk about things that are very similar to the Revelation. Okay, they talk about the end times and about the world to come. And so you can see that stuff, and the parallels are phenomenal. So it's pretty exciting stuff. So then we have Isaiah's commission. Now, this is right after Isaiah realized, and you can compare this also with the apostles' commission, because Isaiah realized after he'd been cleansed of the Lord by fire, and the apostles, of course, you had the Holy Spirit come down and cleanse the apostles and give them bravery and courage by fire. The apostles went out to complete Jesus' commission, to go out to all the world and spread the good news. And Isaiah was given a commission very similarly. In Isaiah 6, it says, And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. And he said, Go and say to this people, Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed. Then I said, Oh, how long, O Lord? And he said, Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. Okay, so look at this particular verse and think about this. The interesting thing is when the Jewish people returned from exile, and I'm going to show you some quick prophecies, but when the Jewish people returned from exile, after they were exiled in the second temple and they began to return, we have a record that says about 50,000 Jewish people, including their servants, all returned. And that was just a remnant, a small portion of the total number of Jews at that time who had been residing in Babylon. So here's a few of Isaiah's prophecies that I think you're going to like. We have the prophecies of exiles and kingdoms. So here's the destruction of Assyria. A couple of prophecies of that relate to Isaiah 14, 24-25, 31, 8-9, and 37, 36-38. Now, as you will recall, Isaiah lived in the 8th century BC. He lived under the rule of Assyria, and Assyria was destroyed by Babylon starting around 609 BC. That was well after Isaiah lived. Isaiah passed away decades before that. But Isaiah prophesied the destruction of Assyria in verses like this, and he even named Babylon, which was just a small state during his time. But he foretold in many verses the power of Babylon. And then, of course, he went on to say that Babylon would be destroyed, but I'll get to that in just a second. So here's what he said in Isaiah 39, 5-8. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and that which your fathers have stored up till this day will be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and some of your own sons who will come from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. Then Hezekiah said to Isaiah, The word of the Lord that you have spoken is good. for he thought, there will be peace and security in my days. See, little selfish side of Hezekiah right there. He realized that there was future destruction. And of course, one of the arguments that Isaiah actually wrote this stuff is because writing about destruction during his own time could have earned him a death sentence, because you can see during the time right around 586 BC, when this first temple was destroyed, some of the prophets or people who were claiming to be prophets or had prophetic visions, many of them were killed by the kings, such as Nebuchadnezzar. But I digress. Here we go. We also have the Babylonian destruction of the first temple. Again, Isaiah was living in the 8th century BC during the first temple, but it wasn't destroyed until over 150 years later. So in 586 BC, and this, you can also compare this verse to Isaiah 63, 18 to 19. Here's Isaiah 64, 10 to 11. Your holy cities have become a wilderness. Zion has become a wilderness. Jerusalem, a desolation. Now recall it. We have, of course, Isaiah living in Jerusalem, which was in Judah, which was south of Israel. He lived with the 2 tribes of Israel. And we have, of course, the 10 tribes who were living above him. And of course, around the year 721, the 10 tribes dispersed. But I digress. Again, our holy and beautiful house, where our fathers praised you, has been burned by fire, and all our pleasant places have become ruins. What's interesting is if you go to Israel today, you can see the foundation. You can see parts of the first temple, and you can see some of these places where Nebuchadnezzar had burned the temple, and had burned cities and walls and other fortresses in Jerusalem. So here is Isaiah. He also prophesied. Now, not only did he prophesy that the Babylonians would take over the Assyrians, he prophesied that the Medes and the Persians would rise to power and take over Babylon. Okay, you can compare this with Isaiah. And this is one of the reasons I'm pointing this out, is to speak to the theory that Isaiah is a bunch of divisions. All of these prophecies unite the different books, the different chapters in Isaiah. They unite them. And without the uniting of these passages, we would have no true understanding of all of these prophecies that occurred. Again, we're speaking right now of Deutero and Proto-Isaiah. Supposedly those are 2 of the second and first divisions. But we can see right here, Isaiah 13, 17 to 19, Isaiah 40, 20 to 23, Isaiah 47, 11, Isaiah 20, 9 to 10. These all have to do with the Medes and the Persians coming to power, Medes and or Persians coming to power. Now here, we know that the Persian king Cyrus, named Cyrus, rose to power in 539 BC. At that point, okay, he rose to power actually before that, but in 539 BC, he took over Babylon, he and Darius the Mede. And so he is named in Isaiah 45. Isaiah 45, 1 to 5 says this: Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him, and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other besides me. There is no God. Okay, and so we see the very significant prophecy of the Medes and the Persians' rise to power. So we also have prophecies of the Jewish return from exile and rebuilding of the temple. And this started right around 537 BC. In fact, the foundation had been laid in 535 BC, which is 70 years after Daniel himself had been taken into exile. So Isaiah in 27, 12 to 3, 14, 1 to 2, and 6, 11 to 13 also references the return from exile. But this is one verse where he was talking about Cyrus again, 45:13. I have stirred him up in righteousness, and I will make all his ways level. He shall build my city and set my exiles free, not for price or reward, says the Lord of hosts. Now, of course, we know that Cyrus did do that. He issued a decree to go out and rebuild the temple. And of course, people started rebuilding the temple, and other decrees followed. There was a decree that occurred by King Darius, not to be confused with Darius the Mede, but Darius the Persian, around 520, We also have the decrees that came out in 457 and 444 BC. And now these all give us a time that we can use to wrap back to the prophet Daniel, who talked about 77s less 7 after the decree goes out to rebuild Jerusalem. That's, of course, in Daniel 9. That gives us the timeline for when the Savior, the Messiah, will appear, and also when he will be, quote, cut off. Okay, so we have the timeline. And if we were to add the years and take a look at the most likely two, which is 457 and 444, simply because that's when Jerusalem itself was also being rebuilt, the structure around Jerusalem, which is more consistent with Daniel 9, that brings us all the way up until a window of time between 27 AD and 39 AD. And so interestingly enough, Jesus was cut off in the year 33 AD by my estimations. There are other people who are scholars who back up the year I've pointed out there, but others have listed years of 30, 31, 33. To me, 33, for numerous reasons, is the one that seems the most consistent with the evidence that we have. So Isaiah also prophesied the servant. But before I get to the servant prophecies, I just want to tell you a little something really quickly. Just to point out some New Testament references to Isaiah, because some people might say, did Isaiah write the book of Isaiah? Well, we would know what the New Testament authors and Jesus thought about that. And so we can go to the book of Acts to see what the author Luke thought. He gave us the story about Philip and Philip's encounter with a eunuch. And of course, Philip encountered the eunuch, who was a court official of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians, and he was in charge of all her treasure. He came to Jerusalem to worship and was returning, seated in his chariot. So he was reading the prophet Isaiah. It doesn't say he was reading Deutero prophet, any Isaiah, some unnamed person. Instead, it says he was reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join this chariot." So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I, unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. Now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this. See if you guys can name this passage. "Like a sheep, he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opens not his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe this generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." And the eunuch said to Philip, "About whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this? About himself or about someone else?" Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with this scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What prevents me from being baptized?" And Philip said, "If you believe with all your heart, you may." And he replied, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." And he commanded the chariot to stop. And they both went down into the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. Now, I included this. This is Acts 8:26 to 38. Notice I inserted the verse 8:37. This verse is sometimes omitted in English translations, but that verse is, of course, referencing Jesus Christ is the Son of God. A very important verse, clearly. Now, here we have the words right from Jesus. So here's what Jesus said about the prophet Isaiah. "When Jesus had said these things, he departed and hid himself from them. Though he had done so many signs before them, they still did not believe in him, so that the word spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" Therefore they could not believe. For again Isaiah said, "He has blinded their eyes and hardened their heart, lest they see with their eyes and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them." Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him. Nevertheless, many even of the authorities believed in him. But for fear of the Pharisees, they did not confess it, so that they would not be put out of the synagogue. For they love the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. Now, of course, again, this is speaking to the unity of Isaiah. The hypotheses that Isaiah is broken up into at least three divisions, including 1 to 39, 40 to 55, and 56 to 66. It can be, again, squashed with this idea that we can see multiple references from different supposed divisions that unify the material. This is a reference to Isaiah 6, along with Isaiah 53. We also have other New Testament references in the books of, in the other three Gospels. We've got references or quotes from Isaiah. 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, 1 Peter, Hebrews, Ephesians, and Revelation. All of these contain quotes or passages, references of Isaiah. So here's what Matthew 3:3 says, and it's a reference to Isaiah 43, again, coming right from this book. We have, "For this is he who was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah when he said, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make its path straight." Of course, that's speaking of John the Baptist. John was the voice crying in the wilderness, and that's exactly how that played out. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. For Isaiah says, Isaiah, this is Paul speaking in Romans 10:16, "Lord, who has believed what he has heard from us?" That's, of course, a reference to Isaiah 53:1. Josephus, he made it very clear who wrote the book of Isaiah. And he talked about Cyrus that I just talked about with you. And it says right here, "This was known to Cyrus by his reading of the book, which Isaiah left behind him of his prophecies. For this prophet said that God had spoken thus to him in a secret vision. My will is that Cyrus, whom I have appointed to be king over many and great nations, send back my people to their own land and build my temple." Of course, as you know, the temple was destroyed in 586. King Cyrus did this in 539 when he took power. He issued a decree soon after that. This was foretold by Isaiah 140 years before the temple was demolished. Accordingly, when Cyrus read this and admired the divine power, an earnest desire and an ambition seized upon him to fulfill what was so written. Josephus also made it quite clear that the Jewish Holy Scriptures had not been added to or removed or altered or changed any time between Artaxerxes, the complete history had been written. Okay, so he noted that by the time of Artaxerxes, all of the Holy Scriptures had been closed. Okay, here's what he said: "From Artaxerxes to our own time, the complete history has been written, but has not been deemed worthy of equal credit with the earlier records." Now, this is in the 5th century BC. "Because of the failure of the exact succession of the prophets, we have given practical proof for our reverence of our own scriptures. For although such long ages now have passed, no one has ventured either to add or to remove or to alter a syllable, and it is an instinct with every Jew from the day of his birth to regard them as the decrees of God, to abide by them, and if need be, cheerfully to die for them. Time and again, ere now the sight has been witnessed of prisoners enduring tortures and death in every form in the theaters, rather than utter a single word against the laws and the allied documents." So you can see what's saying right here. He is talking quite specifically to how much the Jewish people revered their holy scriptures, okay, and how the holy scriptures had not been added to after the 5th century BC. And of course, you've got the many passages coming out of there. The understanding is that the last book was Malachi. Isaiah's vision, I talked about a little bit before, but I want to get into the prophecies of the servant because I think these are the fascinating ones. Isaiah, it says, Isaiah 42:6-7, "I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the prison, those who sit in darkness." Now just consider the time when you can see lots of references in Isaiah about opening eyes, about healing people, healing the blind, healing the sick. There are a number of different passages. And as you recall, when John the Baptist was in prison under King Herod, he asked his disciples to ask Jesus whether or not he was the Holy One, the Most High, the one to come, the prophesied servant, the Messiah. And Jesus returned to him and referenced Isaiah and talked about how he had healed people, how he'd opened the eyes of the blind. Isaiah 49:6, also a reference to the servant, and also speaking of light and to the nations. Now, the nations, of course, are the nations outside of Israel, the Gentiles. "It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth." Okay, so we've got the light to the Gentiles. Isaiah 52:13-15. Here's what it says. Now, if you want to think that this refers to, your question is, does this refer to either a man, or does it refer to the people of Israel, or does it refer to the country of Israel. And I'm going to be able to dispel your notions with respect to people or country of Israel in just a moment. I've got a number of reasons why. It does not refer to those. It refers to the man, the Holy Messiah, Jesus. And that was the Jewish understanding of these passages. And you'll see my evidence of that in just a moment. So Isaiah 52, 13 to 15, this gives us a better description of exactly what happened during the crucifixion than the Gospels do. What exactly happened to Jesus, how much he was marred. Think about this. Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them, they see, and that which they have not heard, they understand. They've got the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, here is the Isaiah 53. This is what they call the torture chamber of some Jewish people, some of the rabbis, because when they read this, they realize that this definitely speaks to our Messiah. And so here's what it says. Who has believed what he has heard from us? Okay, you remember the references that I showed you in the New Testament to this exact verse. And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Now keep that in mind. I'm going to get to that from the Sanhedrin in just a moment. The arm of the Lord. Whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or beauty or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by man, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Okay, notice subject, object, subject, object. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Okay, I'm just accentuating certain verbs here because it's clear that it doesn't say the Lord has laid on Israel the iniquity of Israel. We've got not the same subject. We've got a different group here referenced, okay, a different person referenced. Okay, by his wounds, we are healed. Again, his wounds, we are healed. We've got the third person and the first person, okay? Third person, first person, third person, first person. You see how that goes back and forth. It doesn't say first and first, which would be the assumption by the Israel people. The Israeli people are healed. By Israel, Israel is healed. It doesn't make any sense to think of it that way. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Just think about the times when Jesus, he was crowned with thorns. They were mocking him, beating him. He was, obviously, as you can see from Isaiah 52, he was beaten beyond all recognition. And whenever somebody hits you or you bump into something, you hurt yourself, the initial reaction is to scream. You let everybody know, ow, that hurt. He didn't open his mouth while he's being beaten. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, those were, of course, the Jewish people during his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see the light. Now, I inserted the word the light in there. I'm using the English Standard Version, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, several places, does say in 53:11, the light. And be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Okay, so the transgressors, the ones who sinned, that would be Israel. That would be the people of Israel. And this is somebody who makes intercession, one who did not have the sin. Okay, bore their iniquities, did not have violence himself. Okay, so you can't say that this is Israel making intercession for Israel. It doesn't make any sense. Now, in the Targum, Isaiah 53, which has been attributed to Jonathan ben Uzziel of the 1st century, with, of course, we have to note that the Talmud does assign some portions to Joseph ben Shija around 300 AD. But this includes the following interpretation of 53:10. And it was the Lord's good pleasure to refine and purify the remnant of his people in order to cleanse their soul from sin. They shall look upon the kingdom of their Messiah. They shall multiply sons and daughters, and they that perform the law of the Lord shall prosper in his good pleasure. Now, notice that in the first century, this Jonathan ben Uzziah, if he was the one who wrote this, or if it's written by the other Joseph, but either way, early Jews did realize Isaiah 53 made a reference to the Messiah. Okay. So now you also have some other things. So some people have argued that this passage, the ones I read, is about either Israel or a country or Israel as a group of people. Here's several reasons to discredit. One, Isaiah said he had no form or majesty. And of course, we know that the country of Israel is beautiful. We know that many of the people in Israel or the Israelites are also beautiful. And this person had no form or majesty, no beauty. Two, the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us. He shall bear their iniquities. He makes intercession for the transgressors. Okay, so I'll get back to that in a second. Number three, he was righteous and had done no violence, and no deceit was in his mouth. Of course, we know that the Israel had been condemned for its sins, and all fall short of the glory of God. So you can't say that any of those people were righteous and had done no violence, had no deceit, nothing at all. And four, they had made a grave with the wicked and a rich man in his death. And of course, that refers to Joseph of Arimathea, who was a Pharisee who so generously buried Jesus. Now consider that while he was up on the cross, it was very strange because none of his family, aside from his mother, were there. There could have been some relatives, but not the brothers. We didn't hear about the brothers or his sisters being present. We hear that the apostle John was there and the women apostles were there. But who was there to take him down off the cross? Unfortunately, none of his family or his apostles or people like Peter, James, and John, they were nowhere to be found. They were hiding. Okay. So Joseph of Arimathea, who was a Pharisee, stood up, went up to Pontius Pilate, asked if he could take the body down, and he buried Jesus in his tomb, which had never been used before, a rich man's tomb. Joseph of Arimathea was rich. Now, think about this. The pronouns in this passage, on these passages. Now, you ask the question, are they first person, third person, singular, subjective, plural, objective, or possessive? So here we have the Lord laid on him, third person, singular, objective, the iniquity of us, first person, plural, objective. He, third person, singular, subjective, shall bear their, third person, plural, possessive, iniquities. Okay, he, third person, singular, subjective, makes intercession for the transgressors, plural, objective. So you have to look in the sentences to see what's the person and whether the person being described or the action being described is referring to the subject or the object of the sentence. It's really important that we take a look at that. And the ransomed of the Lord, here's another unifying quote that you can find in Isaiah 35, 8-10, and Isaiah 51, 11. Here it says in Isaiah 35, 8-10, and the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion, with singing, everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy and sorrow, and sighing shall flee away. This ties quite nicely in with Isaiah 51, 11. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion, with singing, everlasting joy shall be on their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. See, the exact same words are in these passages. Now, in the Sanhedrin, it gives us an idea of the timing of Jesus. And of course, the Sanhedrin 97b says the school of Eliyahu taught 6,000 years is the duration of the world. 2,000 of the 6,000 years are characterized by chaos. That would be the period between Adam and Abraham. 2,000 years are characterized by Torah from the era of the patriarchs until the end of the Mishnaic period. And that's, of course, the patriarchs starting from Abraham, going through Moses, Solomon, David, and others, all the way up to 1 AD. And 2,000 years of the period of the coming of the Messiah. Now, of course, they figured that the Messiah did not come. That's how they continued that verse. But of course, we know that he did come, and they were expecting him at that time. In fact, many people were claiming they were the Messiah during that period because the expectations were high. They'd reached the point when they were expecting the Messiah to come. Here's Sanhedrin 97:8. Again, this is from the Jewish Talmud. And this is the Jewish ideas that were written hundreds of years after Jesus walked the earth. But still, this is their points. They realized this. Here's what they said. They were pondering about the Messiah. And he says, he may come in a generation that is entirely innocent, as it is written, and your people shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. Isaiah 60:21. Or he may come in a generation that is entirely guilty, as it is written. And he saw that there was no man, and was astonished that there was no intercessor. Therefore, his arm, remember the arm of the Lord? His arm brought salvation to him, and his righteousness, it sustained him. And that's Isaiah 59:16. And it is written, for my own sake will I do it. How shall it be profaned? And my glory I will not give it to another. Of course, this is Isaiah 48:11. Now, again, we've got the Trito Isaiah and the Deutero Isaiah being unified here with the understanding from the Jewish people when they're looking back and interpreting the passages. Sanhedrin 98a says, Rabbi Alexandri said, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi raises a contradiction between the two depictions of the coming of the Messiah. It is written, there came with the clouds of heaven one like a son of man, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. That's in Daniel 7:13-14. And it is written, behold, your king will come to you. He is just and victorious, lowly and riding upon a donkey and upon a colt, the foal of a donkey. Now that's in Zechariah 9:9. Rabbi Alexandri explains, if the Jewish people merit redemption, the Messiah will come in a miraculous manner with the clouds of heaven. And if they do not merit redemption, which is clear what's going on here, and you can again go back to Isaiah 53, they did not merit redemption. They were not righteous. This is why the Messiah came lowly and riding upon a donkey. Of course, that was fulfilled just before the Passion Week, or during the Passion Week, I should say. In fact, it came Monday of the Passion Week. Jesus presented himself into Jerusalem as Hosanna in the highest. He was praised, recognized for the first time by many as the Messiah. And he, of course, was riding on a donkey, just as predicted by Zechariah. Who rides on donkeys anymore? Okay, the Messiah was supposed to be riding on a donkey. So I just wanted to point out that idea. So the idea also, Sanhedrin 98a, and here is also another little clue of who the Messiah is to be, and also who the Sanhedrin, these ancient Jewish people, thought the Messiah would appear as. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said to Elijah, when will the Messiah come? Elijah said to him, go ask him. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said, and where is he sitting? Elijah said to him, at the entrance of the city of Rome. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi asked him, and what is his identifying sign of which I can recognize him? Elijah answered, he sits among the poor who suffer from illnesses, and all of them untie their bandages and tie them all at once. But the Messiah unties one bandage and ties one at a time. Think about this, about how the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and about how when Jesus appeared, he came down and he healed people. And a lot of times you don't think about how serious that is. A lot of people are sick today. A lot of people have various sufferings. A lot of people have diseases. We all have something. Even one of my friends said, everyone has something wrong with at least one of their organs. And I have a skin condition, so that's my organ. Everyone seems to have something. But imagine you spend your life and you've got this particular condition of not being able to walk at all. These days, thankfully, we have mobility options for people who are unable to walk. And I have a student who just came to my office yesterday who's benefiting from one of those mobility options. But of course, there's terrible struggles that people go through in that particular condition. And if you went back to the ancient times, the people who were unable to walk had to be carried around by other people. So their entire lives, they had to be carried around. There was no other way for them to take care of themselves. They had to be carried to eat, to sleep, carried to shelter, carried to relieve themselves. They were always at the mercy of other people. And so you can think about the time when Jesus was preaching and he was inside a house. And in this house, while preaching, these friends of a person who had been suffering and who had been unable to walk was lowered down into the house because the crowds were so great around the house, this person couldn't get inside through the door. So lowered down through the roof of the house to Jesus. And you can imagine how this person looked at Jesus and realized how there was an opportunity, how if he showed faith, his sins, everything would be healed. And of course, Jesus did just that. Jesus commanded him to get up and he'd be able to walk, pick up his bed and go away. and do whatever he wanted to do. Now he was free. He didn't rely on all of these other people to help him. He was able to do things for himself. And you can only imagine the emotions in this man and in his friends when Jesus healed them and healed him. So that was one wonderful thing. I don't think people realize a lot of times who Jesus was. We sit here and I'm looking right now at the chat and I see some pretty great people in there. I want to say hi to you guys. I haven't been paying attention to the chat probably as much as I should have, but I see St. Tommy and Kip and Digital Hammurabi and Gorgeous Roddy Chrome. Welcome, you guys. I just want to say a lot of times we spend time arguing back and forth. A lot of us have our opinions on the Bible and opinions on scholarship and opinions on all that kind of stuff. But when it all boils down to the end, think about why Jesus came down here and what he did and who he was, because he came to cure, he came to heal. And all we have to do is merely accept him. And it sounds hard. We've got that resistance. We've got that inner sin nature within us that tells us, no, do your own thing. It's you. It's all about you. You're important. It's all about Jesus. The Bible makes that quite clear. But also God makes that clear. I've talked to people who've heard the voice of God, who know that it's been quite clear. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I have a friend who I met on Twitter actually, and she'd been abused all through her childhood by a family member who was raping her. And she makes poems and does some beautiful things sometimes today. She was at one point sitting in a church pondering revenge, and she'd been a little bit older at that point, and she was thinking about all the things that she could do to hurt this person for all the hurts that he inflicted on her. And while she was there, she heard the audible voice of God saying, "It is his to revenge. The revenge is his. He will do that. He will inflict that revenge on that person for what that person did to her." And so she realized, and she's a tremendous Christian. Hugh Ross says that he also heard the voice of God. And to him, God told him that he was being too prideful, that he wasn't so great, that he wasn't as great as he was apparently thinking of himself to be. I also heard the voice of God in 2016. I was thinking of making some changes in my life, and God reasoned in actually a lot of words that I don't have all memorized, which I wish I did memorize or wrote down immediately. But words, because I was so taken by what he said, and I was rather without words. But anyway, so he explained to me in no uncertain terms exactly the people who were very important in my life and where my priorities needed to be and how I needed to get my act together and do certain things. And so I realized that God does, usually if you are going to hear from him, it's in a matter of correction. He corrects us, and it's not that easy getting correction, but he definitely corrects. And those are the only time I've ever audibly heard him. And those are the two reports that I have from people that I know. I also have in Audible, another friend who also, she was on my channel once, and she also explained how he corrected her with respect to the wines that she was drinking. And so she hasn't had a drink since. And so anyway, here we go. So in Isaiah 61, we have a pretty interesting passage. And so several of us have posed questions. I should answer some of the questions. Oh, okay, there's questions in here. All right, let's see here. Hold on. Well, let me get to, I've just got a couple slides left. So let me just get to a couple slides, and then I'm going to go back to these questions. So Jesus self-identified with Isaiah 61 in Luke 4:16-22. I won't read this whole passage, but Jesus went into the synagogue and on the Sabbath day, and he stood up and he read the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. The scroll of the prophet Isaiah, again, was given to him. It doesn't say the scroll of the many people and many names or the school of Isaiah or anything like that. It says this scroll of the prophet of Isaiah was given to Jesus. And he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Okay, so pretty cool stuff. So other verses in Isaiah also explain his rule over the nations. So Isaiah 11:10, his reign in the kingdom, Isaiah 2:3-5, righteous judgments, Isaiah 11:3-5, 42:1, 4, and 66. Now, again, I'm referencing these because you're going to notice they come from all over Isaiah. These are not just limited to one small uh, claimed section. He's a light to the Gentiles who would worship him. Isaiah 42:6, 49:67, and 52:15. He would serve, would suffer in extreme ways, and would be rejected by his own people of Israel. Of course, we've got the Isaiah 49, 50, 52, and 53. After his suffering, he would be exalted and would see the light. He would then restore Israel. You see Isaiah 61, and judge the wicked people who rebelled against him, and will usher in a new, peaceful, comforting Jerusalem. All of this fits and unifies the book of Isaiah. So getting to where this Deutero-Isaiah hypothesis is and what we've got going on with that, I've read this before, but it goes back to a person who traced the history of the hypothesis that Isaiah was written during the time of the prophecies. Now, here's why this person, Ulrich Burgess in 2010, said, to compound matters, Isaiah is said not only to have announced the prospect of salvation, but also to have mentioned the name of the new Persian ruler, Cyrus II, from 559 to 530 in Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1. It was this problem which gave rise towards the end of the 18th century to the argument between ecclesiastical and rationalistic interpretation. So in other words, what they're saying is we can't handle the fact that there is a fulfilled prophecy. It is impossible for a man to prophesy. So their rationalistic position, their naturalistic idea, which rejects God, is to place Isaiah during the time of King Cyrus. Okay, and from that, all of these theories have emerged. Now, here's some of the ancient elusive evidence. And I say elusive because there's very, very little evidence to support the divisionary theory. So Nathan Masjak has identified two ancient items, only two. In the Leviticus Rabbah 6:6 and 15:2, Rabbi Simon attributed the passages in Isaiah 8:19 to 20, two small passages, to a prophet named Beeri. Since Beeri's prophecies weren't enough for his own book, Rabbi Simon said they added them to Isaiah's. Now, of course, let's note that this was written around 500 AD, 1300 years after Isaiah. And as far as I know, this is the first time this particular theory was resurrected. And two, or was erected, I should say. And two, the Great Isaiah Scroll includes Greek paragraphoi, or paragraphs of two types. One type is horizontal dash in the margin. The type appears 60 times, and these correspond to major section breaks. The second type is a horizontal stroke topped with a semicircle. This type appears in the Great Isaiah Scroll, and it names a bunch of places. And so it's interesting because I went and I looked at where these breaks were in this Isaiah, because they are saying that this is such good evidence. And of course, in the old days, a long time ago, before, 1,000 years ago, they did not have the chapters in Isaiah. Those weren't created until later. Okay, so the chapters weren't there. So the Dead Sea Scrolls must have had their own little divisions that they created. So if we look at the divisions, we can see that they actually relate quite well to God. If we look at the 6 divisions, the semicircle ones, the second type, here's what's interesting. Isaiah 35:10. Now, between this and Isaiah 36:1, there is a little semicircle thing. One of them refers to the Lord bringing hope and joy. The other one tells us the Lord punishes. Isaiah 39:8 and Isaiah 41. One tells us the word of the Lord is good. The other one tells us that the Lord wants to comfort his people. The Lord is a comforter. 42:12 and 42:13. In one, it says we should give glory to the Lord. The other one says the Lord is mighty. In 44:28, the Lord is my shepherd. And 45:1, the Lord empowers and punishes. Isaiah 52:6, the Lord fulfills prophecies. And 52:7, the Lord offers peace and hope. And then in 59:21, the Lord has made a covenant. And 61, the Lord is the light. Okay, so these are pretty neat. Also, some other rebuttals to the idea of divisions, besides the fact that all the prophecies unite quite nicely. I can find many pieces of evidence with respect to the author of the book being written in the place of Jerusalem in the Judah area. I'm going to get to that in just a second. We also have references, of course, from Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all through the New Testament to the prophet Isaiah, Paul. So we've got that too. The OT, the Old Testament, in 2 Kings 8 through 11 and 2 Chronicles 32, 20 to 23, they describe the prophet Isaiah in his world, in his, acting in his world, in his time, in his 8th century BC time. 4Q 176, Dead Sea Scroll. And from the book of Isaiah, that's quoted. It introduces Isaiah 41 to 5. Words of comfort, comfort my people, says God. 4Q 265, it is written in the book of Isaiah the prophet. That introduces Isaiah 54 2. The Damascus document, MSA, says, when God visits the land, he will repay the retribution of the evil ones upon them when that happens, which is written in the words of Isaiah, son of Amos, the prophet, who said, there come upon you and upon your nation and upon your father's house days which have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah. Ephraim is another word for Israel, and that, of course, was the 10 tribes of Israel that were located in the area that is now, or came about later on to be Samaria. And then, of course, Judah were the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, to the south, which were occupying the area which is now Israel, modern Israel, but it was called Judah during that time. And that's a reference to Isaiah 7:17. Other rebuttals. So among his geographic inclusions, Isaiah's geographic inclusions include multiple references to Zion, Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem. And I have seen modern scholars say that it seems very likely that the book was written by someone who was very familiar with Jerusalem or who was in Jerusalem. References to Babylon as being there, quote, there, there, rather than here. Okay, you can see that in Isaiah 52:11, referring to go there. Okay, if he's in Babylon, why would he say go there to Babylon rather than here? Okay. And to Jerusalem is a place where people will come rather than go. So Isaiah 2, it speaks to Jerusalem, come to Jerusalem. Okay, that's implying that he's in Jerusalem. And that's in Isaiah 2, 1 to 3. We also have specific types of trees like cedar, palm, acacia, myrtle, pine, plane, cypress, and olives. Now, these trees are local to Israel. We have evidence throughout much of the Old Testament with references to these particular trees being in Israel. Okay, so they might have been brought over to Israel at one point, but they were in Israel at least by Isaiah's time. And valleys. So he references a place called Achor and plains of Sharon. Now, these are 2 places that are local to the Judah area. And of course, they're right around where he resided in Judah. And he mentions 3 of the 4 plants used in the Sukkot, which may be because the citron had likely not been imported from northern India yet. We have evidence that says that the citron, which is one of the 4 plants that's used in the Feast of the Tabernacles, okay, one of the 4 plants that's used, and I don't know when exactly that they started using these 4 particular plants, but we see that the estimations of when the citron arrived, or the etrog it's also called, when that arrived over in the Israel area from northern India wasn't until the 5th century BC. And so there's no mention of that particular plant at all in Isaiah. And there are many mentions of mountains and hills, and that's consistent with Judah and not Babylon. Babylon's a flat land. So you've got lots of references to mountains and hills because, of course, the author was in Judah. Now, I could also talk about Gleason Archer's rebuttals. His strongest one, or the one he thinks is one of the strongest ones, is the fact that Isaiah in many cases talks about the crimes of idolatry. And apparently the crime of idolatry did not exist. They were not doing that. The Israelis were not doing that after the fall of the Second Temple while they were in exile. Okay. Also during the time of Ezra, they were not worshiping idols. Okay. So all of the references to idolatry, Gleason Archer feels is a pretty clear-cut case for the book being written by Isaiah in the 8th century. Okay, just a few references. So let's see, I'm going to go look at see what we have right here, see if I have questions. So I want to say hi to Slam RN, hi to Philosophical Logic, hi to Patrick Alexander, Kip Davis. And he's talking about, Kip Davis talking about Jeremiah lived precisely because of his support of Babylon's invasion. That's true. I've got some other evidence on other people who were killed. And actually, that reminds me, let me just grab that so I can find exactly which that was. So I don't want to name the wrong person, but I'm pretty sure I think who it is in my mind. So yeah. Zedekiah, I think is the name of the person. So let's just see. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so there was a Nebuchadnezzar. He burned the false prophets Zedekiah and Aham to death in 597 because they encouraged exiles to hasten the return to Judah. Now, this is coming from a person called Butenweiser, 1919. Where did Deutero Isaiah live? Out of the Journal of Biblical Literature. You can also see Jeremiah 29, 21 to 23 as a cross reference to that. Okay, so here is what else we see. Let's just see if I see some other things. So I also want to say gorgeous Roddy Chrome. Hi. Uh, Hi, Digital Hammurabi. Taking Back Eden. Thank you for the stream. Hope all is well. Yes, it's definitely well. So why does Matthew not identify Isaiah when he cited? Well, there's some cases where people cite Isaiah's verses and they don't say it's the prophet Isaiah, but I read the ones where people were citing the specific name of the prophet, although we do have a lot of verses. And it's interesting because it's almost coincidental. We've got a lot of verses that talk about eyes that can't see and ears that can't hear, all throughout the New Testament. And that, of course, is a reference to Isaiah 6. We also have references to the cornerstone that Isaiah references. And so those kind of things, sometimes they might not name, they might just quote the prophet, or they might just quote him. They might talk about, and who has believed us? That, of course, is a reference to Isaiah 53:1, and we've got lots of references to 53:1. And so the suffering servant, actually, Digital Hammurabi, I would hope that you would like to explain who you think the suffering servant in Isaiah is. I know that some Jewish people do think that that's either the nation of Israel or the people of Israel. And I feel that I've offered a partial rebuttal to that, and I could keep going into that. I've dig pretty deeply in that in my book that I'm working on, but I just offered a little bit of a rebuttal. And so that's all I see right here. All right. So Zeng Zeng Fukushang also say hi. Doki Doki. Thank you so much for the chat here. Let's see, what did Doki Doki says? It looks like it's a sticker. So thank you, Doki Doki. That's very kind of you. And I also just, I don't know if I'm sharing the screen, but I also wanted to say, let me just come back here. Okay, so I hope you guys are enjoying this kind of stuff. If you want to hear more about Isaiah, we could do that. I also have been gathering information on the book of Daniel. I've been doing that since 2019. I've done some videos on Daniel before, a couple of years ago, but I would gladly do some more again if people are interested. I think it's really fascinating how Daniel so well aligns and so well predicted the kingdoms, and how he also predicted, or his predictions relate so closely to Antiochus Epiphanes and what happened during the Maccabean period. And that's one reason why people have tried to attribute his books to that period, his book, I should say, to that period. And so I just want to say thank you so much, you guys. I hope you'll like and subscribe and do come again. And just remember, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. So thank you so much. And also remember what Isaiah said, come, let us reason together. Thank you. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.